Creator sets free. That is the name given to Jesus in the First Nations version, an indigenous translation of the New Testament, which Wyatt so kindly read for us a moment ago. And we use this translation today because today in service we are honoring Indigenous Peoples Day. It was actually this past Monday, and it is more commonly known as Columbus Day. But Indigenous Peoples Day is essentially the counter-holiday to Columbus Day, an alternative. It is for those of us who look back at Columbus's real record, at the conquest of the Americas and his brutality, and wish to honor instead the people who were here before Europeans arrived. Indigenous Peoples Day celebrates and honors the culture and history of the indigenous peoples of North America, what some of you might know as American Indian or First Nations. It is a good day to acknowledge that this building stands on the traditional lands of the Muskogee people, and that this church today partners with Mayan indigenous communities in Chiapas who still, to this day, face displacement and violence. This morning, then, we read from the First Nations version of the New Testament, which they call a retelling of Creator's story from the Scriptures, attempting to follow the tradition of the storytellers of our oral cultures. To do this, the editors essentially retold the stories, not word by word, from Greek to English, but by capturing the thought behind each sentence and idea, invoking idioms and expressions from their communities, and using a traditional way of naming people. In other words, they brought Scripture to life, offering new insights by translating it from the perspective of indigenous folks. And so, for instance, this translation uses Creator sets free instead of Jesus. What's lovely about this is that while it's unfamiliar, it's a pretty accurate translation, actually. The name Jesus comes from the Hebrew Yeshua or Joshua, which is based on the Hebrew root for deliver or rescue. In Hebrew, the name Jesus means something like God will deliver or God rescues. We don't notice that most of the time because we're so familiar with the name Jesus. But a good translation is Creator sets free. So in our story today, Creator sets free fields a question from he takes over and he shows goodwill, more commonly known, we'll go with that, as James and John. These two of Jesus' disciples come to him with a request. "Wisdom keeper," they say, "when your shining greatness, your glory is revealed, permit us to sit in the places of honor at your right hand and at your left." So, spoiler alert, I don't know if any of you have read ahead to the end of the Gospels. These are not going to end up being fun places to be. At the end, Jesus ends up between two thieves, one on his right and one on his left, and all of them are on a cross. So James and John do not know what they are asking for, but even if we don't know the ending, there is something about their ambition that irks us. We are quick to say, "Silly James, silly John, you selfish men, stop trying to be in the place of honor," right? As if we don't all sort of do this sometimes. We all want to be in the place of honor for something, at least, right? Maybe not the best person at our job, but honored for how good of a friend we are. Maybe not the most amazing professional in our field, okay, that's hard, but a really good parent with a really cool kid. Maybe not a world-famous celebrity, but we just want everybody who leaves our presence to know that we're a really good singer, or really funny, or really charming, or really kind. Maybe we want a place of honor for how little we seem to seek places of honor, for how good we are at being so humble. We are, it turns out, a lot like the other 10 disciples. Because they get mad at James and John, and you get the sense that they're not mad because they believe all disciples should be equal. You get the sense that they're mad because each of them secretly wants to be in the place of honor, and they don't want these two guys calling dibs too fast. The Creator sets free, however, sees this basic instinct in all of us. Creator sets free sees the way it creates societies of power and oppression and calls us to something greater. The verse says, Creator sets free called them together and said, other nations have rulers, such as the people of iron, known as the Romans. They like to show their power over people and push them around. But this will not be the way of the ones like you who walk with me. The great ones among you will humble themselves and serve all the others in the same way the true human being did not come to be served by others, but to offer his life in the place of many lives, to set them free. In another, maybe more common translation, whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. Servant of all. In other words, it doesn't matter where you are in line. You may not be first in line. You may not be second in line. You may be second to last in line. But Jesus still calls you to turn around and ask the person behind you, how can I serve you? That, in Jesus' eyes, is how we become truly free. This week, as I was researching this First Nations translation, I came across a guy on Reddit who had strong opinions about it. Please note that no story about a guy on Reddit having strong opinions ever really ends well. But he said, why do they need their own translation? Why do the First Nations need their own translation? After all, he said, they have the King James. I am somewhat pleased to report that this man's comment was downvoted to oblivion. And we can have the conversation about the King James translation. It has beautiful poetry, do not get me wrong. It also has bad translation decisions and outdated, inaccurate manuscripts. Fine. I don't think it's really about the translation. I think this guy wants a place of honor for his perspective. In his perspective, there is one clear translation that is best, probably one clear interpretation of that translation that is best, and he wants a place of honor for his perspective and doesn't understand why there are others at the table. This strikes me as a hidden temptation we all fall into. Maybe we even try to be good servants of all. We help our neighbor, we fix someone else a plate before we go get ours, we donate clothes to those in need. But even as we do it, some part of us wants a place of honor for our perspective. It's like if we're having a fight with someone and we're trying to make peace and we're saying all the right things. Yes, I will take out the trash more. Yes, I will do the dishes more. Yes, I will remember to call you back when you call me. But you have to admit, I was super busy when I didn't do those things. We're willing to do all sorts of nice stuff, as long as we get some say in how other folks see the world. Our perspective becomes the last thing we are willing to let go of, the thing we want honored even when everything else goes sideways. And there's beauty in that. God gives each of us these miraculously unique lives and miraculously unique perspectives. But it becomes a problem when we become like the people of iron that Jesus warns us about, when we want to show our power over people and push them around. Over the last 50 years, maybe more, we've come to realize that information is power. The ability to control a narrative is power. Our perspectives can shape how we understand the raw data of the news, history, reality itself. It is no surprise that only in the last couple of decades have we recognized and named the danger of gaslighting, the way abusers can manipulate people into doubting their own reality, their own perspective. In an information age, if you can put your perspective in a place of honor, that is power. So we ask, on this day, was Columbus a brutal man who sparked a brutal conquest that killed millions and was arrested by his own compatriots, by the way, or a brave explorer who opened a new frontier? And it depends on perspective. A lot of our fights in our politics and in our personal relationships come down to this: whose perspective gets to sit in the place of honor? To put it in fancy words, life today is all about jockeying for an epistemological position. To put it more simply, we're arguing about whose truth gets to sit in the place of honor, whose way of seeing the world wins. And we should all do kind things for people who are less fortunate than we are. But to become a servant of those people, a slave of those people, as Jesus calls us to do, to me, that requires taking on their perspective. Notice that Jesus does not say, brutally impose your perspective on everyone around you, but he also does not say, be nice. Try to see every single side, listen to every single perspective. He says the great ones will humble themselves and serve others. Whoever wishes to be first must be slave of all. So our call is not to be nice and see every perspective or insist on our own. Our call is to become uncomfortable, to seek out the least listened to perspective, the ignored perspective, the perspective of the person who is suffering the most under a situation, the interpretation of Scripture that comes from people who have been beat up and kicked around, who have suffered the most, the version of history written by those who end up nailed to crosses, not the people of iron who put them there. Our call is to ask, how does a kid in Gaza see Middle East politics? How does a guy who sleeps outside understand our city infrastructure? How does an indigenous community who has been trying to honor and respect the earth and is watching climate change destroy their livelihood and the land they have lived on for generations, how do they think? What would happen if we asked a trans person's view on our public policy? What would happen if we designed the mass incarceration system around somebody who had just gotten out and can tell you what doesn't work? We can ask and listen and say, I am going to make myself a servant of this perspective. How does someone radically different from you interpret Scripture, read the news, understand what God is saying? And you know what's funny to me? If you do this in an argument, if you do this in your daily life, if you listen to the perspective of the person who got hurt, they call you a decent human being, a good Christian, and that's a good thing. If you do it about history, they call it politically correct, and somehow that's a bad thing. But the reality is that this is what God is calling us to do, to be servants of all, not just the ones we like, not just the ones in positions of power. The reality is that taking on the perspective of someone who is suffering is not easy. It will come at a cost. Most of us are already weighed down with anxieties and burdens and fears. All of that makes you want to retreat into a hole, to just love only the people who are easy to love, to just detach and find some inner peace, maybe hide from politics and the bad news we see and the rocky friendships and the people we don't like or don't know how to feel about, just walk away. And we feel trapped by that. And if you feel trapped, you're never going to be able to muster the willpower to make yourself someone else's servant. If you feel overburdened and crushed, you're never going to find the freedom to truly love the folks around you, much less take their perspective. But that's why they call Jesus Creator Sets Free. Because the true human being did not come to be served by others, but to offer his life in place of many lives to set them free. He does so not by insisting on a place of honor for your own perspective, not by bowing down to the perspective of the guy who feels strongest or loudest, not by listening to the people with the power to nail a man to a cross, but by following the one who goes there out of love. A relationship with Jesus should free us to love more deeply, to let us tap into a spiritual power that makes us more empathetic and open to other ideas, open to other perspectives. By making yourself the servant of the weakest, by listening and learning, by seeing the world as a servant of those who cry out seeking freedom. That is how we make sense of a world that just seems like too much sometimes. It's how we make sense of elections and the news. It's how we end up celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day instead of Columbus Day. So let us celebrate being servants of all in song.